So let's continue this kind of little fantasy adventure slash isekai trend with the series whose title I will probably fail to pronounce because I think it's in German. Widergeburt. Widergeburt. I'm just going to refer to it by the alternative title, Legend of the Reincarnated Warrior, or Reincarnated Warrior, just for simplicity's sake, because I'm not saying that this entire video. So yeah, I can barely pronounce this title. Another funny thing is the fact that this book is kind of similar to Cradle, but this wasn't an intentional tie-up. This was just kind of, I read them apart and I realized when writing scripts, these are very similar books. So they ended up as part of the same track of episodes. Anyway, this wasn't an intentional comparison. I don't want to compare the two, but they are very similar. Oh, and I should also mention here that this is a 18-plus book. It's not full-blown erotica. There's like one sex scene in the story that, in context, feels kind of weird if you ask me. Like, when you think about it for too long, it feels like a really weird sex scene. But there are pictures in this to mimic a Japanese light novel, and these pictures do have some nude shots in them. So, they have some nude shots of the two heroines, as well as one of the aforementioned sex scene. So if that's a big no-go for you, I'll see you all next time. But for those of you who that's okay with, and I'm probably not going to mention it that much, let's push forward. The plot this time around follows an Eric Viger, who is when we're introduced to him in Chapter 1, is in the middle of a battle against a big monster known as the Great Overlord of the Seventh Realm, in a giant quest for revenge after the aforementioned Overlord killed his wife and daughter. And he dies. Yeah, he just dies in the first chapter, book over. I'm joking, obviously. With a title like Legend of the Reincarnated Warrior, what do you think would happen? Honestly, I thought he would reincarnate into the future of this world, but no, he instead goes back in time. To his own shock, he finds himself traveling backwards in time into the body of his younger teenage self, specifically around when he was 17 or 18. Now, this feels a little weird. Honestly, with the title like Legend of the Reincarnated Warrior, as I said earlier, I thought he would be reincarnated into a new body. So it feels less like reincarnation and more like mental time travel, which is two different things. So the title feels a bit misleading, but that's only when you dive into the specifics. Let's dive into the specifics of the tale. Unless there's an eternal recurrence thing going on, but I haven't read far enough ahead to see if that's actually what's going on. But anyway, yes, so he's in the body of his younger self, and now with his knowledge, skill, and the fractions of power he had at the time, because his current body can't handle the full power he had of his future self, so he only has like a small portion of the power he originally had. He has to use his future knowledge to grow in strength, change the future, protect his loved ones this time around, and, find a way to defeat the Overlord, that Overlord monster I mentioned before, so he could prevent the death of his wife and daughter. And maybe get a second wife, because this is also marketed as a harem series. So with the plot like that, you can kind of see how the story goes on from here. Our hero works to make sure certain things happen, and he meets his future wife, using his future knowledge to make himself stronger, slightly richer, and do some things over different from the previous timeline, while also, recounting his memories of the previous timeline. One of them is the aforementioned sex scene I mentioned earlier, which is kind of weirdly placed. It happens towards the end of the book, so it's kind of a spoiler, but not even that really, because it's not even important to the plot of what's going on, but just him thinking back on a moment where him and his eventual wife had sex, which it feels really weirdly placed. Like, it kind of was like a weird moment, like that time Doc Ock, when he was in Peter's body, got off of the memory of Peter banging Mary Jane. Yes, that happened in the comics, look it up. Yeah, it feels like that when you think about it for too long, because this is a different self than his current self. So it feels a little weird for him to be this much going into detail with the time that he had sex. again, it just feels a little awkwardly placed. And this feels like this was added on to make sure the book was considered a plus 18. And it just didn't want to have the characters banging because it didn't feel that in character at the time when what was going on was going on. Which, yeah. But again, this just feels really weirdly placed. Outside of that moment, my biggest complaint is with the ending. Unlike most books, this really doesn't have a climax because this entire volume is basically all set up. And, well, it just kind of ends in with the whole big, hey, volume 2 coming out. Maybe there'll be a climax there. There's not like a big fight or there's some obstacle for him to overcome in volume 1. I mean, he does have some minor conflict of trying to cure what will, I believe, eventually become his second wife, or she's a secondary heroine. And she basically asks him to help her train to grow stronger, but we don't have a big fight or any other kind of conflict because, again, this is all basically set up. He's getting closer to his wife again and meeting this new girl and trying to be a better version of himself from when he was back then, make money and grow stronger. But again, it feels weird and almost slice of lifey despite the action-packed opening. And I guess maybe the memories are supposed to serve as a climax. But again, they're memories. They're not what's presently going on, so it's not much of a climax. And then there's a sex joke I just accidentally made there. I didn't mean to do that. Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't feel like much of a climax. It just feels like this is just him reminiscing on a big battle or that time he had sex with his wife, and it feels really awkwardly placed. Yeah. Honestly speaking, I am curious to see where Volume 2 goes, and Volume 1 in and of itself was a pretty decent ride. Again, it's very similar to Unsouled in how the first part feels very slice of lifey and like it's all built up to something. Albeit in Unsouled case, we got the build up and payoff, and in this case, I feel like the payoff's in the next book. So, yeah. Let's talk about the main character. Eric himself is fine. He has his goal of trying to grow and become strong enough to protect his loved ones this time around, as well as we get to see his past memories through his eyes as a kind of some fun way of fleshing out his character a bit further in a different way, as well as him reminiscing on past events in the past world, the previous timeline, around what would be his current self. But again, this just feels kind of weird, like the aforementioned random and flashing back to sleeping with his wife is, again, kind of weirdly placed, as there was really no setup for that, it just kind of happened. And I keep getting hung up on that, because again, it just kind of happened, and just really weirdly placed. Yeah, so again, I focus a lot on that one scene, but the overall book is fine. Overall, I do recommend it, but I honestly say it's a light recommendation. Like, if I did a score, it'd be like maybe like a 3.5, or maybe just a 3. This would be a book I would pick up just to see where the story goes in the second volume, and if the second volume didn't grab me, I'd probably drop it. But yeah. Again, I have to remind you this is an 18-plus book. There's that one prominent sex scene, and there's nudity in at least 2 various points for you to see a naked woman in the book. So, it's not even that sexy, it's just nudity, so yeah. If you don't find that interesting, then you can just move along. And again, it's not even that interesting, it's just there, especially for the first one, where it's more him examining her to cure her. So, yeah, I think this is one where I'll save final thoughts until I actually read Volume 2. But Volume 1 did interest me. That's basically what it's supposed to do. So, hey, at least I'm on board for another volume of this stuff. And, yeah, I'll see you next time.